In this video, I'm going to show you 9 trending website sections of 2024 that you can steal for your next project. I'm going to give you the link to all of these and it'll be down in the video description. Let's hop into it. Alright, so for our very first section, if we come over to Tola's website, we can see that they've done something unique here, that the cards are sitting on top of a background. And this isn't too uncommon. We can see Huddle's website as well does something very similar with these cards that sit on top of a dark background. If we head over to our Figma file, you'll see that I've put together a bit of a wireframe and then an example here for you guys to work with. Of course, it follows the same principles of having rectangles on here with rounded corners and then a dark background behind it. An important thing to consider is that these rectangles need to come very close to one another. So it's important to be careful that your spacing is very precise. Now, this kind of section looks really great as a header, but it can also be used throughout your website. Huddle and Tola actually use this theme throughout the entirety of their website. So it's very versatile and pretty easy to work with as well. Let's go on to the next one. Alright, so our next section is actually one of my favorites if you have something really profound to include on your website. 1nil does it best, and you can see that all it really is a cropped photo with some really profound text on it. Another example that is perhaps a little less good is on Rinse FM's website. And this idea of having a very thin photo is that it acts as a bit of an interlude or a spacer between two other sections that might be very text heavy. Let's hop onto the Figma file and take a look at the wireframe and what I came up with. Alright, so back on Figma now, we can see the wireframe is very straightforward. There's not a lot going on with this, and I think that's the beauty of it, and that's what makes it so good. If we take a look down below, we'll see the finished result. There's not a lot to talk about, but I want to draw your attention to two things. Very first is the gradient that sits under the text. Without it, the text is pretty difficult to see, which is why we need to add it. Second is to pick your image carefully. We actually need to crop this image a lot in order to get a good aspect ratio. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. Awesome, on to the third one. The next section we're going to take a look at is one of my favorites and takes advantage of the new trend of having giant text on your website. Let's check it out. We're here on Mattia's website, and of course we can see the massive text up top. What really brings it together is the images, or a slideshow in this case, displaying massive images as well. Let's take a look at another example. Studio Viday does this technique very well, with the giant text up top, nav links in the middle, and then a giant image or video beneath. If we head over to Figma, this is what the wireframe looks like. The thing that makes this section look so damn good is the discrepancy between the massive text up here and very small navbar text. Additionally, the positioning of the navbar below the text makes the text feel more important. Additionally, the positioning of the navbar beneath the giant text makes the giant text feel very important. If we scroll down, we can check out the finished version, which I think doesn't look too bad. The only considerations here is to use a nice large photo. Since we are blowing it up quite big, we don't want it to appear pixelated. And other than that, using a nice display font. In this case, I'm using Oswald, and it's very large at 290 pixels. Let's move on to number 4. This section is definitely the most unique out of all of them. Let's take a look. Alright, so we're here on the website Cream, and they have a very interesting layout here that I want to talk about. This kind of layout is a fantastic way to display multiple images, as well as getting a bit of text in here as well. What you'll see when we hop over to Figma is I actually added an arrow over here so that we can scroll through even more images. The idea with this one is either you'll have one main large image and more that you can scroll through, or if you want to get real fancy, as you scroll through each one, they end up becoming larger before leaving the page. Here is the wireframe, and this is the button I was talking about where we can scroll through and check things out. And here's my imagination of the finished product. As I'm looking at this right now, I'm thinking it might be wise to have some circles down here to indicate how many images there are and how far along you are. Always something to improve upon, I guess. One thing to consider here is the orientation of the images. Like with one of our previous examples, we actually had to crop these images quite a bit in order to make them fit. So just think about that when you're searching for images to use with this sort of layout. Let's move on to the next one. For our next section, we're actually going to revisit Huddle. Now the section I'm about to show you is a little complex and requires a little bit of scrolling for you to get it. Let's scroll and check it out. When we scroll down, everything seems pretty normal until we hit this point, and then the next card begins sliding up. It creates this cool effect where we can see the steps of the process being laid out right in front of us. And that's what we're going to try and recreate. This website, Tepaku Maru, has a similar idea to Huddle, but instead of scrolling in order to get this stacked effect, you simply have to hover to access each one. Our section is going to take a little more inspiration from Huddle, but let's check it out in Figma. Back on Figma, we can check out the wireframe. Now the idea is, like I said, for each of these sections to slide up and down, revealing the content underneath. This effect looks sort of complicated in theory, but in practice is pretty straightforward if you're developing it or using a third-party tool like Wix or Framer. If we scroll down, we can check out the finished result that I envision here. Of course, what you put in each of these cells is entirely up to you. I went for a very conventional 2-column layout. And as you can see, I took a little bit of inspiration from the Tepaku Maru website by having this text slightly cut off by the next container. When it comes to the design, this section is pretty straightforward to do. And you should definitely consider it if you have a list of 3 to 5 options that you want to go through in some good detail. With that said, let's move on to the next section. Now, I know I already said this, but this next section is also one of my favorites because of the simplicity of it, but also the utility of it. Let's check it out with an example first. Alright, so we're in Ami now, a calendar scheduling app. And what I want to draw your attention to is this section right here. It's a pretty simple section, but isn't used on most websites and definitely could be. One thing that Ami could actually do better is to have a button here or make these draggable with the mouse. The only way of navigating through is by hitting these small little buttons. Other than that, this is a really good section for displaying a large amount of information in a fairly small section. Let's hop into Figma now to check out the wireframe and see how I designed it. Alright, so here's the wireframe. We have 2 ways of really interacting with it. There's the small nav buttons down here, or the big button up here, which will take you to the right. If we scroll down, I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. If we scroll down, we can see how this turned out. It's supposed to be for a wine tour or vineyard website, and I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. Not too much going on here, but like I said, you can display anywhere from 3 to about 10 cards on here for the user to scroll through. Anything more than 10 is a bit cumbersome to click through, and different formats might be better. But other than that, let's go on to the next section. Now, a video about website sections wouldn't be complete without a bento layout, so that's the next one we're going to look at. We're here in a website called Linear, you might have heard of it, and they have this unique bento layout here that we're going to try and emulate but modify a little bit. The main difference is ours is going to be full width, whereas theirs is much more compact. Let's hop into Figma and check it out. Here's the wireframe I started out with, and it's actually pretty similar to Linear's. Now, an important note with bento grids is as you go along and figure out your content plan, often the size of your boxes is going to change. And like we'll see below in the finished version, the actual layout of all the boxes did in fact change a little bit. If we scroll down, we can check it out and you'll see what I mean. So here's my interpretation. It's for a website called Evolve. And like I was saying, this top row up here, I actually split into 3 boxes instead of just 2, since it made more sense with the layout of the content. Another important note that you should consider is that it requires a fair amount of content to be able to do a bento layout. Since it is relatively compact in the way it displays information, you need to make sure that you have enough to put in there, whether that be text, images, or a bit of both. Well, that's not looking too bad. Let's hop over to the next one. The next section we're going to take a look at is a very trendy section, especially on Dribbble and other places as well. I've actually gone on to Dribbble and taken this example out of there, but there's so many doing this cutout image text effect here. It's actually very easy to accomplish in Figma with some subtracts, and it results in a very cool looking layout. We can check out another example over here, Pardon how blurry this is, the screenshots didn't get that big. We can take a look at another example over here. Pardon how blurry it is, the screenshot quality isn't the best. The layout is pretty straightforward with a nice big image and a cutout for the uppercase letters to fit in there. Let's take a look at the wireframe and then on to my finished product. Once again, a very simple layout, but you could add many other things. More text in the bottom, nav bars up here, buttons that cut out of the image as well. The options are pretty much endless. Let's take a look at the final results down here. And I think it turned out pretty well. The one important note here is to get a good image that fits well in the space, as well as an image that doesn't have anything important in the top corner that's going to get cut off. That's pretty much it for this one, so let's move on to our 9th and final layout. So far, our sections have been pretty photo heavy. So for this next one, I really wanted to emphasize the text by taking out all the photos. I couldn't actually find a good website to show you for this final layout. So we'll just take a look at the wireframe and then straight on into the real design. So the idea with this section is, of course, to have more of a text-heavy area, but as well to open up the website with a little more white space. This area under here is entirely unused, and we could have put in an image there, but instead we want to let the text speak for itself. If we scroll down, we can check out the final result down here. An important thing to consider is this body text down here. It generally looks better if you have 3 or more lines to display. Without the extra text, it's a little bit too spacious, and there's just a bit too much white space in the whole section then. And there you go, that's all 9 sections done and dusted. I'm going to put a Figma link down below so you guys can access and edit them and even include them in your next projects. If you did enjoy the video, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. But other than that, I'll see you in the next one.